This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. I hope everyone out there is doing well. I hope you had a great week. My guest on the show today is Cid. Cid is an amazing talent, interesting guy. Had a great time hanging out with him in New York. I'm going to get into all of that in just a minute. Before I do, I want to make sure that everybody out there is subscribed to this show. If you're listening for the first time, we're in like 60-something episodes. I think because this show is weekly, it's kind of easy to forget about the back catalog. But man, if you go digging a little bit, there's some incredible episodes out there. Wax Motif is one I've been thinking about a lot lately. That was so good. All these amazing artists are there just waiting for you to click the play button. And make sure you're subscribed. Click the little subscribe button. That way, you won't miss another episode. Every time I post one, it's just going to get hand-delivered straight to you. It's literally me. I walk up to your door, I beat it down until you answer, and then I force you to listen to this podcast every week. Doesn't that sound great? Who wouldn't want that? All right, getting punchy. I'll move on because I also want to tell you about our Spotify playlist. The Back to Bangers Spotify playlist is a list that I update every single week with all the brand new music from my guests, from myself, and a lot of the music that we talk about on the show. I throw it in there to give you some context. So if you're listening, you hear us mention a tune, you want to find out more, it's all there waiting for you. The link to that is going to be in the description of this episode. And one last thing I did want to say is that in the last couple episodes, I've been asking people to help us out here, to help spread the word, just by telling a friend about us, sending a tweet that you're enjoying the show. I've been seeing a lot more of that, and honestly, that is the best way you can help this show grow. That's the best way you can support us. We don't ask for money, and we don't really spend money on advertising. So word of mouth is how this show grows. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, if you'd like to hear more of it, it really is the best way to help support us. Just tell a friend, somebody you think might enjoy this show, or just send out a tweet, a post, whatever, that there's a cool show out there that other people should check out. So shout out to everybody who's been spreading the word. We love you. We're one big family here. backtobackpod@gmail.com is my email address. You can also hit me up at Willy Joy or at backtobackpod on all social media. All right, so for this interview with Cid, I met up with him at his studio out in Brooklyn. I was out there for a wedding. Shout out to Nick Catchdubs, former guest of this show, who had an amazing wedding. I was also hanging out with some future guests of this show, but you're just going to have to stay tuned on that. But I really enjoyed this conversation with Cid. We'd never met before. We kind of run in different circles, and so even though I've known of his music for a long time, there was just never that connection. I find him really interesting, not only because he's an exceptionally talented producer, super versatile, making lots of different styles, and also really prolific, just always putting out music. His most recent single is called Take Your Place with another artist named Vinny. I've been really loving that one. I actually played it on my SiriusXM radio show this week too. Big tune. He's done remixes lately for people like Chromeo, for LSD, which is, Sia and Diplo's project. Also this year, he put out the Bad For Me EP on Hexagon, which is Don Diablo's label. Him and Don Diablo go way back. We get into that relationship. He's just had an awesome career path. We talk about the work he's done with people like Kaskade, with people like Cedric Gervais, how he kind of started as a behind-the-scenes guy and has now moved to be the frontman, the artist himself. What is that transition like? How does that work? It was just a great conversation. I think you're really going to dig it. It's a little different than some of the stories that get told a lot on this show, so I'm excited about that too. Cid is also on tour right now. Make sure you go to cidmusic.com to get all of those dates. He's going all around the world. I'm going to put a link to where you can follow him, find all the tour dates, all the music in the description of this episode. But for right now, I want to jump straight into it because this episode is packed. So check it out. This is me and Cid back to back. Let's go. It's a nice little room we're in here, man. You say you've been here for about 3 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And was there ever a point, because it's interesting to me when DJs and producers and musicians, especially doing what we do, doing dance music, choose to stay in New York.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there was a mass migration some years back.
Yeah. Still happening, for sure.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
What for you, what keeps you here?
I was born and raised in New York, and I love doing sessions, and I love working with songwriters and stuff, but I like just the contrast of kind of, I'm in here, by myself. I just get lost in what I'm doing, and then as soon as I walk outside, it's just, you're in New York, and it's just nonstop. So I love that, having that contrast, and just, family, and, I've entertained the idea of moving to LA, but I just, I don't know, I'm worried it might not be for me.
When you go out there, is it just kind of a culture shock thing? Because for me, it was like coming from the Midwest. The first few times I would go out to LA, I mean, it was a blast. It's always a blast. But yeah, I never foresaw myself living out there.
Yeah, I also just having to drive everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm from border, Queens, Long Island, and out there I had to drive around. And as soon as I moved here into Brooklyn, I sold my car. Like, I don't even like driving anymore. I take the train everywhere. So just like that is a key factor for me, just being able to just walk around and take the train everywhere, as opposed to having to sit in traffic for like 30 minutes every day.
Yeah, man. I mean, 30 minutes is like a good day. It is one of those weird things where I think people in LA have sort of just, it's like a mass delusion that that's somehow okay,
Yeah. On the other end, though, it is like it's everyone who's wants to be a songwriter or producer is out there. So in that sense, for collaborating, it's amazing. But there's two sides to that too. It's like you can be in sessions every single day and not really build relationships with any one or two particular writers or producers. And even here, I guess a big part of not feeling that urge is I met a couple of songwriters that there's only a few producers out here kind of doing their thing. So we've kind of created a little community of, people to work with, and you build. I'm not the type of guy in one session we're going to have like something special. I think you got to build a relationship, get comfortable with each other, and then kind of build like that, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense to hear you say that, because there is that culture in LA where you just have to like go through everybody in your contact list and work with every single person. But you're completely right that, I think the best music is made by a small team over time. If you look at, some of the biggest pop producers, they have their core guys, right? And every record, maybe the public doesn't realize this all the time, but, a lot of these records, even if they sound radically different, they're all made by kind of the same team, the same core team.
Yeah.
And you said you were born in Queens. And how old are you?
I'm 17. I'm from Sweden.
Yeah. I have $10 million. Yeah. What was growing up in Queens like at that time? I mean, musically, like sort of, when I think about Queens at that time, I'm thinking about sort of the classic New York hip hop era. I'm thinking about, Armand Van Helden and some of the classic house stuff. What was your early exposure to any of that? Any early memories?
Well, I have two older brothers. My oldest brother's 10 years older than me. The other one's 8 years older than me. And they both had very different tastes in music. My oldest brother, he loved like classic rock and stuff like that. And then the middle brother he was more absorbed in hip hop and even early house. Both of them were actually kind of in early house. So from really early, I was exposed to really the beginning of like, I guess like the hip hop scene here in New York. And I think the main thing about New York is just you're just exposed to so many cultures and so many genres of music even, you know, my family has a Spanish restaurant, so I was exposed from really early on to a lot of Latin music. It was such a weird thing growing up. Like I kind of was exposed to all of this stuff, but then I discovered, like, it started in, I guess, house, and then for some reason, kind of, obviously, I think Daft Punk One More Time I have on
Sure.
CD, and like towards the end of like grammar school, I discovered like DJing and stuff, and then I never kind of moved towards hip hop. I moved towards you know, house and trance and that side of it. Even though all of my friends were kind of doing the opposite. It was interesting.
How did you get into it in the first place? Just through your brother?
I've thought about this. So there was this like DJ at my dad's restaurant where he has like a catering hall, and they would do all these like private parties. There was this one guy who was like did all of those parties, and it at the very beginning it was like Real McCoy and like La Bouche and like that, those like really commercial dance records, and I think that's kind of what attracted me to that, like, I guess, tempo and sound. And then it was one other kid in my elementary school, and I was like, let's start DJing, and he was like, okay, and like we're both still have been DJing since then. So
wow. How did your parents react to that at that age, you wanting to DJ?
I asked for, I think for one Christmas my mom bought me like a Newmark turntable, and I like, wait, which one came first? Shit, I have a really bad memory.
It's all good, yeah.
I've been drinking a lot in the last later years of my life.
Yeah, we'll get into that too, yeah.
Okay. I think the first CD player I got, this house DJ just let me borrow.
Oh, wow.
So I had a Denon dual CD player, and I went out and I bought like this old Vestax used mixer. And when I bought that mixer, I discovered that place sold vinyl. And then for Christmas, I got like the shittiest like belt drive, plastic blue Newmark turntable. And I started kind of going out to this one record shop every week, and they didn't sell hip hop. They only sold, it wasn't even really house at the time in New York. It was that like very Jersey kind of almost like hardstyle.
Yeah, I
stuff.
kind of know what you're talking about. Yeah, like what they used to call hard house, which probably has like a different name now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I was, once I like started kind of wanting to play vinyl and stuff, that's what I was exposed to. And like I would maybe pick up one record I liked every week or every 2 weeks, and kind of just grew from there.
It's cool that you started that at such a young age. I feel like that's kind of rare. Was it, I mean, what were those first gigs like that you were doing?
Well, the first one I did, I was like, I think it was 8th grade. My friend had like a end of year graduation party, and I brought like the speakers from like my living room, and like we just like played music in his backyard. And then I guess you asked like what my parents kind of thought about this. So I was in this weird position where with the restaurant, my brothers a few years later, they started kind of waitering and like doing like the private parties in the back, like they would work those, but I started DJing those. So my dad loved it that I had kind of started building this business. He'd recommend me, and he'd be like, oh, like he wouldn't even say I'm his son. He'd be like, you know, this guy, he'll do it for this or blah blah blah, and look, you know, and then I'd get on the phone with them. So they always supported it.
Yeah, that's cool. You were kind of like adding value to what they were doing, right? Business wise.
Yeah. And you know, for my dad, my dad grew up in Spain. He was, you know, his family didn't really have a lot of money growing up, and he had, out of his brothers and sisters, he was the only one that went to college and got a degree. And for him, it was really important, like coming to the U.S. and his children getting degrees. So my dad's like, look, I want you to go to college, get your degree, and you could do whatever you want. You know, either obviously focus on your career or whatever, you know. Yeah. But they've always been super supportive of the music thing.
So when you were in middle school, going into high school, did you already have an idea that music might be something you wanted to pursue more seriously?
Yeah, I think in my 8th grade, we had this yearbook. It said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I wanted to be a DJ."
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I feel like very few people, like everyone would have an answer to that question, but very few people would actually go on to do what they said they were going to do in 8th grade. Was that just always the thing? Was there ever anything else?
Well, when I went to college, I asked my oldest brother, I was like, what should I study?
Yeah.
Like, I was before
Were you
before
a good student?
No, I was, I was okay. I just never really put in the work. I did okay, but never, no, I wasn't like.
Yeah.
So I asked my brother, I was like, what's a good field to get into? And I asked my oldest brother, who was more like the more business guy. He did finance and stuff like that. He's like, you should study accounting. He's like, I think there's going to be a lot of jobs opening up in that field. I was like, accounting, that sounds great. I don't know what yeah, sure, let's do it. Right. So I did the whole business thing. And while I was in college, I started really focusing on the time I had on production. I was DJing like on the weekends, a lot of these like, weddings and like some club stuff, but like
just all like kind of locally and
yeah,
low-key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I started focusing on production. So I was finishing this degree, I was focusing on production, and then when I was like 19, 20, I had been working in Reason, and like the week before, I had just discovered what sidechain was.
Right,
it was
big moment.
Big moment. And this was pre like YouTube tutorials. Like I had a magazine. It was Robbie Rivera was on the cover, and I had like all of Robbie's like a lot of his like records, like Funkatron and like stuff like that. So I was like, wow, I got to read this. And he talks about like this thing called sidechain. So I figured out how to do it in Reason, and then I like the first thing I finished, I was like, well, this is not bad. And my friend's like, oh, you should send it to like a couple people. And at the time, I was like really influenced by Marcus Schultz and his radio show, Global DJ Broadcast.
Yes, right.
So I was like, let me just send it to this guy. Like 4 weeks passed, and he hit me back after 4 weeks, and he ended up signing it to Cold Harbor. So that was the moment where I was like, and that was, I think, in my junior year, where I was like, maybe I should like not really think about getting a job right out of college. So
yeah, I mean, that's a rare experience, right? Yeah. To have sort of the first thing you send out to a big guy just be accepted, and
it was. I remember
that's usually a good sign.
I remember him emailing me, and he's like, all he said was like, "Holy shit, this is incredible. Is it signed?" And I was like, "Is this for real? Like, is this Marcus Schultz?"
Right.
I was like, please call me if. And then he called. This was like 2:00 in the morning. He calls like my parents' house.
Oh wow.
And he's like, yeah, I want to sign this record. I was like, okay.
Yeah. And did you even really know what that meant?
No,
at that point?
I had no idea. I remember just like obviously getting a contract, and like he'd put it on this thing called Ibiza. He was doing these yearly compilations, Ibiza 06, and came out on the vinyl sampler, which was really cool. And I remember him coming to New York a few months later, and when I met him in person, he's like, oh my God, dude. He's like, great to meet you. He's like, man, I've been playing this song everywhere. Wait till I play it, it's. And that was the first time being in a club, and like, I didn't even like. I was just like on the dance floor, like, hanging out with friends, and one of my friends was like, Carlos, I think he's mixing in your record. I was like, what? I was like, oh shit. And that was like the moment where I was like, this is what I wanted to. Yeah.
Were you a club kid like earlier? Did you go out a lot?
New York is tough, man. I mean, it's 21. I never really did I always looked like I was like 12 years old.
Right, yeah.
So the whole trying to get I had a fake ID, but it was so bad it would never work, like going anywhere. And I think I grew up in this like era that was post like all the really cool shit happening in New York. And then it was like all like the hip hop clubs that kind of took over that were not totally my scene, I think.
Tunnel and all those.
Yeah. So I grew up in that like middle era. And it wasn't until I was like 21, 22 that I was like, that I really started going out to shows and clubs.
I was actually just talking to another producer friend of mine who lives in New York last night, and he was kind of saying the same thing. He was from that era as well, and he had a career where he was touring around a lot, but in the last few years, he had a kid, he's kind of settled down, and now he said he's kind of back to playing locally a lot. And he was telling me that, and I don't know if you agree, but that there's, with all these new clubs that have been popping up in New York, he really felt like it was kind of a renaissance for club culture here.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's just interesting. I don't know. I mean, everything's a cycle, but it's like what you were talking about earlier with everybody leaving New York. I feel like maybe that left a void that now people are trying to fill with, actual culture instead of just sort of chasing the trends and chasing whatever was hot.
We went through, I think the whole EDM bubble really influenced New York, and like all of these kind of bigger venues were they could book a top tier guy, they could book a mid tier guy, they could book an up and coming guy, and they were going to sell out. People just were like so drawn to the music, and it, that whole EDM sound really was just exploded here in all genres. Not just saying I say EDM, but I mean
EDM is just an easy blanket term.
And I think what happened is, as soon as that kind of popped a little bit, all of these venues in the city are paying an absurd amount of rent, and they started kind of dwindling. You have Flash Factory that had opened up later, that's gone. Obviously, Webster Hall is remodeling.
Still, I don't think they can recapture that vibe, though, man.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. And then, obviously, Pasha closing really affected New York. They really created a home for, like, a community of people. There's nothing really else like that in New York City. Marquee is great, but it's a different kind of crowd.
Yeah, less of a family vibe.
Yeah. And everything, the whole Pasha, idea of like community kind of moved to Brooklyn, and that's kind of started building, obviously Output being like this amazing club in Williamsburg, incredible sound system. People started wanting that, and I think that sparked like, a couple venues like that, and then people kind of moving more towards underground. Then they discovered like, oh, there's like after hour, like, warehouse parties happening like around the block. Let's go check that out.
Yeah.
Or like,
and that's like New York's specialty, man.
Yeah.
Going back to, you meet Marcus Schultz, you've got sort of your first released song in that era of New York nightlife. At that point, were you more or less just kind of trying to just make it bigger, like make another song, that kind of thing? Like what was your mindset at the time?
So it kind of went on the production side. I was like, man, I kind of got lucky. Like I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
In retrospect, he just released it. He's like, yeah, just send what you have. It sounds great. I was like, I didn't know what mastering was.
Right. Yeah, that's
I had
funny.
like a limiter or something on my.
And to start off in Reason, which is like, to me, the unfriendliest of programs to start on. That's do you still use Reason?
No.
Yeah.
So when I signed that record, I was like, maybe I should switch.
Yeah.
So I remember going to Guitar Center and using Logic in the store, and I'm sitting there for like 40 minutes, and I'm like, I don't even know how to get sound out of this thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I was like, this is crazy. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So I said, I saw at the time, again, like one of these interviews, and it was with Gabriel and Dresden. It was this thing on like Apple's website, and I was like, these guys use Logic. And this is when they were like killing it.
Right.
And I was like really influenced with what they were doing. I was like, these guys know what they're doing in the studio. I want to be like produced like them. So I felt that I needed to get Logic. So I got Logic, and Marcus Schultz, if I would message him, he would like respond, but I was like, I got to have something ready to go.
Right.
And it took me like, I'd say like 6 months or a year, and to like really kind of understand Logic and be able to produce in there. So I had no concept that like, oh, I need a follow-up or anything. I was just still at my parents' house, just like making music.
Yeah. And how were you balancing, school and working on music and all that kind of stuff?
Not well, I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, accounting I don't know how I remember my senior year,
Well, because accounting is not like easy work.
yeah, I think I secretly bribed one of my professors. I was like, listen, I'm going to give you a gift certificate at my dad's restaurant.
Amazing.
I actually never gave it to him, but I think he passed me anyway.
Oh, man.
It's really bad.
It's really funny in doing this show, man. So many different people I've talked to that were able to sort of finesse situations like that. I don't know what it is about about us musicians, but
I think we just don't give a fuck.
yeah, I guess so, man. I don't know. But then there is that like crafty entrepreneurial side too, where you're like, yeah, I'll give them the gift certificate, and that'll solve it a different way. I don't know. It seems like everybody figured out their own way to sort of finesse the situation and make it work. It's just a funny thing.
It was tough to balance. I knew I had just like such a passion for making music. I would just go home and just work on music. Early in high school, I had a group of friends and we would play video games. This one kid got me into this game and I got really good. And I ended up...
Which game?
It was called Painkiller. It was kind of like Quake.
Oh, I remember that game, yeah.
So I went on... my friend was like, you should... there's this tournament in Dallas, you should go. And I was like, okay. So I went and I ended up placing top 16 or something.
Yeah.
I was like, this is pretty cool. And then Intel put up $1 million in prize money one year.
Oh, shit.
So, and I didn't take it serious. My parents were like, you're not flying to Turkey to play a video game.
Right.
But they had one of the stops was in Barcelona. So I ended up going there and getting I beat this one dude who was ranked 6 in the world.
Oh, wow.
It's so funny just to think about this shit. But then whatever. So for a year I was really into that, and then when I switched to producing, it's I already had that I could sit in front of a computer and fucking play games.
Yeah.
I mean, I could sit in front of a computer and just figure this shit out and how to make music.
Well, and I've talked to other people about this before. I mean, in a way, if you can trick your brain into processing it that way, I mean, production is like a game, right?
Yeah.
It's all these different parameters. It's it's a puzzle you put together. It's true, man. I think the same thing applies. And you see tons of DJs and producers who either are huge video game nerds or have computer programming backgrounds. It's all I don't actually know the the physiology of it, but I feel like it's all got to be in the same area of the brain,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, what was before I get off of it? What was the height of the video? Was the tournament the height of your video game career?
$10,000.
Damn.
So the whole thing was, each stop was 50,000, and then the finals was 500,000 in prize money.
Crazy.
And I said to myself, I was like, look, I'm not gonna be. I didn't put enough time or effort into it to be I'm gonna fucking. Looking back, maybe I should have.
Well,
some of these kids made crazy money, but
now you look at the esports industry now, it's wild.
Yeah. So I went to 2 or 3 of the world stops, and the finals was in New York. So I was like, I'm gonna practice enough to get top 16 was it was $4,000, and then if you got 9 through 12, it was I don't know, $8,000 or something. I was like, I'm gonna shoot for top 16. I think I'll get that, but I'll also try to get 9. And I ended up getting 9 through 12th place, and I made some money.
No, that's pretty amazing, man.
Yeah.
I didn't even really realize that back then they were still putting up that much money.
This was the first, I think. This was really before, right when Xbox console tournaments were kind of taking off, and Intel is a huge company, and they invested in this.
Right.
It was a whole scandal. This company, this guy was doing some shady shit with the money.
Oh yeah. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
But okay, so you've put out your first track.
Yeah.
You're on your way to graduating. Did you graduate?
I graduated. Yeah.
Nice.
A semester late.
Yeah. Hey, that works, man.
Yeah.
You fulfilled your requirements to your family, all that.
Yeah.
and so where does it go from there? How does it evolve? Because my outside perspective, not actually knowing you, is that things seem to happen fairly quickly to kind of get you going.
Kind of, yeah. So as soon as I graduated, my middle brother, I kind of saw. I was lucky where I could see like the way they progressed in life and the way my parents reacted to certain shit that they did.
Like what?
So my middle brother, he studied graphic design and stuff in college, and I remember he had like for 1 month he just like was at home and really did nothing, and then it was after a month that my dad was like, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, at least I have a month.
Right.
And I was DJing, I was making money. My parents weren't giving me money, nothing. So like, they never had that over me or anything. So I graduated in December, and I was DJing at the time. It was this little lounge in the city called 49 Grove.
Okay.
And I had two other friends who had residencies there, and then I started having residency there every weekend. And
playing house music?
I went in playing only house.
Yeah.
And at the time I was just on CDs, like, and my friends had switched to Serato because they were doing open format. And then I was like, they were like, we want to book you a whole night, but you have to play this. So I like switched to Serato. You know, my friend hooked me up with like all like the hip hop stuff that was like
party jams.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I started playing those style sets there, and a lot of them were back to back with one of my with my best friend.
Yeah.
We had started together.
That sounds fun, man.
Yeah.
I think those kind of gigs make you a better DJ.
Yeah,
too.
definitely. Yeah. And so it was, I think around February, I'm DJing at this place, and I finish my set, and I walk out into the club, and I see this kid, and he looks at me. He's like, "Did you go to this high school?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Carlos?" I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "Holy shit, Aaron!" And he's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, you know, I finished school, and I'm just kind of doing this music thing. I'm producing a lot, blah blah." He's like, "Well," he's like, "Why don't you come to the studio?" And his dad was Billy Joel's original sax player.
Oh, wow.
And he, you know, toured the world with Billy Joel, was involved on the writing side with all that stuff. And in
That's
like
a
the
trip. Wow.
80s, he moved to Glen Cove, and he built out a studio called Cove City. And it's 2 rooms, SSL, tons of outboard gear, like a proper studio. And he did, long story short, he, on the studio side, well, anyway, so I see Aaron. He's like, "Why don't you come meet my dad? Like, he'll give you an internship."
Oh, okay.
And I was like, "Well, okay, cool." I was like, "That's a great idea. I'll get an internship there. I'll learn, and like, my parents will be like satisfied. I'm like,
right.
I got an internship."
Yeah, it sounds official.
Yeah,
Sounds
exactly.
legit.
So, yeah, from finishing out of school, like just this lucky counter meeting, I ran into this kid, Aaron Kanata, his dad, Richie Kanata. And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You want an internship? You got it." He's like, "Be here tomorrow. We have the session at night, but then I need you the next day at like 9 a.m. We're loading in a band." I was like, "I'll be here."
Wow, okay.
And the first night, I remember it was this engineer, Coyle, young kid, but you know, super talented. And he's like, "Listen, don't talk to the client. If they ask you your opinion on the song, you say you love it.
Yeah.
That's it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Got it." And there was Ashanti. Ashanti came in,
shit, okay.
and there was no assistant. I was just the engineer and me.
Oh, wow.
So that was, and she came like, the session was supposed to start at 6. She got there at like 9 p.m. and worked till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And he was like, "You got to be here at 9. So I was like, "I'm not going to drive all the way home. I'm just going to sleep a couple hours on the couch." So the owner of the studio comes in the next morning. He's like, what are you doing?" I was like, "Well, you told me to be here." And it was like 2 hours. I was like, "I might as well just sleep here." So I stayed, I loaded in, and this guy's like, he was like, "What the fuck is this kid?" That's like,
yeah, it's dedication, right?
So
there.
I jumped in head first. He saw like that I was hungry to learn and, you know, respectful and didn't do anything stupid. And that was the first step into like getting lucky. I'd say things progressed quickly because I got lucky.
Sure,
in a
but
lot
I
of
mean,
ways.
we all have to get lucky at a certain point, right?
Yeah.
I had Anna Luno on the show, and we were talking about this, and you know, she was saying that, yeah, you have to kind of catch that spark at some point, because I think you know as well as I do, we all know so many talented people who just, there's too many almost, you know, and I think any of us, like, we all need those random, collisions to kind of get it started.
Yeah.
And so did they just kind of keep giving you more responsibility?
Yeah,
keep
so
learning?
I was like, I want to be an engineer. This studio was, I don't know if you're this guy named Rick Wake, who was like the original super producer. This guy was doing
really
like
familiar.
Celine Dion, Sync, Backstreet Boys, and he was just a guy who walked into Richie's studio and said, hey, I need a studio, I want to record this song. And it was his first ever song. It was Taylor Dane, like Take It to My Heart or whatever.
Okay.
So this guy had his own team there with these like insane producers, incredible engineers. They were doing like Mark Anthony. When I came in, it was like kind of the tail end, but these guys were still there. So there was this one engineer, I was like, this guy was like kind of slobby, but he was just like a fucking super chill, casual guy. But when it came to mixing, this guy was like just a genius. And I was able to kind of watch him and this other engineer that was there, who did like tracked all the rock stuff and did mixes. And I was like, I want to be an engineer. And I was still kind of doing the house thing. And Richie, playing sax, was playing. He was playing in Vegas because he was still he wasn't touring with Billy Joel anymore, but they would fly him out to Vegas to play sax over the DJs.
Oh, wow.
At Tao in Vegas and in Tao, New York.
That's a good gig if you can get it, man.
Oh, yeah. And he's did that for years. So he was like, oh, you make house music? He's like, let's do some house stuff. And he was always one, like, he just got a New York mentality where, like, he wants to create opportunities for a studio and figure out revenue streams and stuff.
That hustler mentality, yeah.
So, I kind of just grew there. And at the time, I was thinking of going to this school called Full Sail.
Oh, I know Full Sail, yeah.
And I applied to the school. I got in. My parents was like, yeah, if you want to go, like, you should go. And I sat down with Richie. I'm like, listen, Richie, like, I'm really thinking about going to the school. And he's like, Carlos, he's like, I gave you the keys to $1 million studio. He's like, you think going to this school is going to really be a better choice than just sitting here? He's like, you have full access to the studio. You can use it whenever you want. And I was like, I think you're right. So I ended up just staying there and
were you able to kind of use that as your school? Like, is that where you would say you kind of like really built up your professional chops for production?
Definitely. As far as I wouldn't say as a producer, I would say more as on the engineering side.
Sure, yeah. Well, and that's valuable too, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot that you learn there that you still probably use today.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That probably a lot of electronic music producers might not have that background. Like, I feel like that could be an advantage for you.
100%. That's what's helped me the most is like, I wouldn't consider in a lot of the time I spent there was self-taught. I'm like, okay, let me mess with this EQ or like figure out what this compressor does or like, I picked up a few things from other people, but a lot of it was just me going in and like fucking around.
Yeah. Did you ever have any kind of mentor? Like, it sounds like you kind of figured all of this out on your own.
So Richie was playing saxophone every Friday in Tao restaurant. Like, he would go around to the tables and
sure.
And the DJ who played there was this old house guy. And at the time, Richie's like, hey, man, like, why don't you come to the studio? He's like, I have a team of people who can, like, make house records, blah, blah, blah. And Richie brought this guy to the studio, and it was really just on the house side. It was just, he put him in a room with me. And this guy's name was Greg Bihari, and he had a group, he was kind of like me, where he went to school in Miami and just was always into house music. Got into with certain producers, started producing, and when he moved back to New York, he bought what was already a label called Gossip Records, and it was like a old house label, and he discovered this guy this guy was playing like keyboards with this singer at like some show, and he was like, who is this guy? This guy's an incredible keyboard player.
Yeah.
So that guy was Chris Malinchak.
Wow, okay.
And so this was way before I came around, but so Greg and Chris Malchak started producing together, and they had a couple names. One was Hot 22, and the other one was Live Element, and they kind of were killing it with this like disco house sound. And Greg is this like, he's like a proper house guy, and he like this guy can spot a sample like miles away. And so at the time that Richie was talking to him and Chris had stopped working together. Chris was doing his solo thing. I had no idea who Chris was or anything. And he came to the studio, and it was really interesting. I had always come from more of like I was like, I can't sample a kick drum or like a loop or anything. And this guy's like, dude, just take that sound. And I was like, okay, fine. He's like, I'll just take this like snare drum. I'll take this hi-hat loop. And like, he kind of taught me like the fundamentals of kind of house music, on the way to produce it, and also like just like telling me stories about like all these old house guys and everything.
The real roots, right?
So as far as mentor, I'd say this guy was like that guy for me. And we started at the studio together, and then we were doing a lot of it on my laptop, and I was like, well, we need to use like this SSL board, and like we need to mix it an analog. And he's like Carlos, he's like, you can do all of this in the box. And I was like, well, it doesn't sound as good. He's like, dude, he's like, it's almost there. It's like, trust me. He's like, most people will not, in house music, are not going to tell the difference.
Right.
And I was like, you think so? He's like, yeah. So at the time, it was like, I had brought in another friend of mine who was one of my best friends from college. He did interning, and he came up at the same time. And we were kind of like slightly fighting for a lot of the same engineering gigs. And there wasn't anything crazy happening there.
Sure.
So when I saw this guy who made house music, who like really understood it, I was like, I kind of want to work with him as much as I can. And I think early on, like, he got some remix. He's like, Carlos, you want to do this remix with me? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I started going down to Jersey. And he's like, I have a small studio there. It was like a pair of NS10s and like a pair of Mackie speakers, and I just started working down there. I'd have my laptop, we'd do everything on there. And I'd say where I really learned a lot more about engineering and mixing inside the box was with him, because I knew all these kind of techniques.
Right.
But
then he kind of was able to show you that there was also this other way, right?
Yeah, and he wasn't technical. He knew what a compressor was, he knew what an EQ was. And it kind of, my style of mixing is 100% from him. Like, he would just be like, just put the kick drum like 1 dB. He'd be like, okay, like just like, I'd pull up an EQ, he'd be like, you see this, like raise up here, and I'd be like, okay, and it would always sound fucking good. And,
right.
And we would, at the beginning, we were going. This is also another thing that was crazy, that we'd go back and forth between the studio and the car, and he had this BMW at the time that had an 1/8 inch. I was like, dude, like, I'll just bring my laptop in the car.
Right.
So we started mixing. He'd be in the driver's seat, I'd be in the passenger side, and we'd be mixing inside the car.
Amazing. I love that, man. And that's, I think the car test is still one of the most valuable things a producer can do.
We like had this like joke that like if we ever like had like really fucking made it big, that we would just buy a hollowed out version of that car and like put it like right next to the studio.
Yeah. I love that. And in all of this time, were you still also working on your own productions? Or did that kind of take a step back for a while?
It took a step back.
Or when did it get started up again?
I'd say with Greg, he was never like, oh, we're doing this under my name. It was never like that. It was like, let's just like do this stuff together. He still wanted to keep the Hot 22 name alive. And I was like, well, I'll do it under, Carlos Sid or Sid. And so
that's when that name started.
Yeah. Like early on, I'd say, with him. And, a lot of the stuff we released was, like I said, it would be like Hot 22, it would be like Bihari and Sid. And I wasn't even, I don't know, man. I just like was kind of oblivious to it all.
You were just excited to be making music.
And I think about it now, like between driving down gasoline, between like the tolls back and forth, it was like an hour away, and I'd sleep over like his house down there, and we'd work the next day. I was probably making like no money at all.
Right.
I don't know, but I didn't even think about it. I'm just like, I was just continuously getting better. We got a couple remix things in. We did like a Lady Antebellum remix that like,
okay,
and like stupid shit. He had like, and him being on the industry side, he knew he had these contacts. So like, we did a Katy Perry remix that was all over BPM for like 6 months.
Oh, nice. And what, like, approximately what year was this? Like, what era?
I don't fucking know. Jesus.
Is this like what, like 2008? Like,
I'd say about my concept of time in more recent years is just like
you and me both, man.
I'd say 09, about 09. I probably was at 08, maybe 08. I'd say 08.
Yeah.
I was definitely at Glen Cove City for at least a year and a half.
How did you leave there? Like, what was the next step?
So there was this guy that Greg knew that they used to work together. His name was Mohammed Moretta. And his big thing, he was a resident DJ at like what was eventually Crowbar and in Miami.
Oh, sure,
and before
yeah.
that, it was some other name. After that, I forget what it was. It was just recently closed. And he was a songwriter too. And he did this song with called I Gotta Let You Go. I gotta let you go.
Oh,
let you
yeah.
go.
I
No
can't
more
remember
sleepless
the
nights.
name, but I know that song.
So he wrote that, and it was always like his project with her, and that was like a decade earlier.
Right.
That was in like the Show Me Love era time, I guess.
Yeah.
So this guy wanted to get a couple new remixes done of the song. He wanted to get new songs done, and he was going to like ADE that year or something. And so we did a remix of Gotta Let You Go, me and Greg. And then the guy was like, "Oh, who are you working with?" And he's like, "Oh, this kid Carlos, blah, blah." He's like, "Oh, I want to come to the studio. I have these original vocals. Let's sit down." So he came to the studio for a week, and we worked. And this guy was like, "Who is this kid? Holy
Right.
shit, blah, blah." And then he went back down to Miami. And he was mutual friend. It was just, again, like one of these like super crazy luck situations. Right. He was friends with this guy, Danny, who was this Cuban guy based in Miami, hustler, like, mover, shaker kind of guy.
Yeah.
And Danny was very close with Cedric Gervais. So at the time, Cedric, he was working with somebody on music, and then he had an engineer that would mix the stuff. And the story that I was told was that this engineer went like deaf in 1 ear or something.
Oh, shit.
So he needed somebody to help mix these records. So Greg connected me with Mohammed, who connected me with this guy Danny, who connected me with Cedric. And he's like, "Come down to Miami for a week. I have these records. I want you to mix them in my studio." So I was like, "Okay." And like, I've always kind of been like, I don't have an ego. Like, I'm very like, can be insecure about situations.
Oh, sure.
Not really. So I went in. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I've never worked in this studio. And I'm like thinking, but I'm putting on like a front. Like, yeah, I know.
Of course.
I can mix this, no problem.
Of course.
So,
which makes sense if, given your background of kind of just, being in like
the right
learning
place.
it on yourself.
Yeah. So anyway, so I went in and she's like, "I want to mix these records." So in that week, I think we mixed like 2 or 3, he'd have changes, blah, blah. And then I finished the week. He was happy. I came back to New York, and then he's like, "Oh, I want you to come back again." So I went back down a second time. And the second time, he had this one vocal song, and the production was like super lame.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Listen," I was like, "I could produce 2. I have some ideas. Like, can I try to do a different production?" He's like, "Okay." So
were you nervous about that? Like, was that, because for me in that situation, I know I would have been maybe even if I thought that, it would have been hard to say at the time.
I don't know. Maybe he already knew, and it was one of those like mutual things, I guess.
Yeah, it made sense in the moment. Yeah.
In that moment. And so we came out, he's like, "I want to do something like this." I was like, "Okay." So sat down and we did something like that. And then I think at the time he was, he's incredible with ideas and kind of like a Greg, where he knows what he wants, but he's,
Yeah, he's the vision.
The vision, exactly.
Yeah.
So then once we did that, then he started flying me down like every, I don't know, once a month at least, around, or a little about that. And we started working on all this different music together.
Right.
And this was right when like things were about to pop. And, he went through a little bit of a figuring out. He was already, touring. He was smart. He knew he was friends with all the owners of, obviously, it was Dave Grutman in Miami, and it was the Tao guys. And so he was touring all over already. And then he signed with this new management, which is Red Light.
Oh, yeah.
And this was like right when things were going to pop. And then he came in the studio one day. He's like, I have this idea. Everybody's doing Molly now. He's like, I want to do this song. And I was like, okay. And he had the whole idea and vision behind it. And we sat down and we did it. And like, I didn't think twice about it. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. Like, we did a really cool production that he was going to play in his sets. And he actually, I remember he played it in Pasha, New York, and he came back. He's like, dude, this thing is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that we did together that came out. And, it just like the whole thing happened in Miami, and like it really took off for him. And then, that was my main thing.
Yeah.
And I was putting so much time and effort into that I was trying to do my own records. Like, I remember at the time he had like one single left with Ultra or something, and he's like, do you have any tracks that you want to do as a collab? And like, we'll put it out on Ultra. I was like, yeah, like this one. He's like, perfect, let's do it.
Yeah.
But I was, so just like mentally involved in what he was doing that my stuff kind of took a step back.
Yeah. Was that intentional? Like, at the time, did you think that kind of you were suited to be sort of, the behind the scenes guy?
Not really. I started as a DJ. That was kind of always the goal for me. I say this to guys all the time now. Like, I think that there's a lot of positives to it. When I did it, I think it made me a better producer.
Yeah, because you also, worked with a lot of other people, right? To produce music for them. And so it's something I wanted to ask you about. It's just kind of how you look back on it, and whether people love to make controversy out of that, out of ghost production or whatever you want to call it. But for me, I'm very curious, as someone who has been involved with that, like, how do you look back on it, and do you, what do you think the place for it is?
Look,
in
there's two sides of it.
Yeah.
I remember at the time, the restaurant my dad had, his brother was his partner, and then my uncle was a couple years older. He retired, so my dad was running this business by himself. So I started kind of helping him manage. It was like once a week, but it was a day that my dad, or didn't have to be there or whatever. And I would go and help on weekends and stuff like that. And then around the same time, I've said this around the time to Cedric. And I was like, man, like, maybe I should just like do that. He's like, you're way too talented to even think about that. He's like, stick to this. And I don't regret it at all. I think it was an income stream for me that, as I was, it's crazy. Like, I was making money off it. It was, even though my name wasn't on these records, like, as we progressed, more and more people started discovering who I was. So I think...
Do you think that kind of helped, for the people who really did dig in and figure out that you were involved, do you think that helped kind of build like an interest for what you would go on to do?
100%. There was this guy in Miami named Biz Martinez, who was a talent buyer for Live and Story. And, being in Miami so much, I became friends with him, and I was very close friends with Medness, who's the resident there. And this was later on towards the end of working with Cedric, but he's like, listen, I want to help you. I know you're trying to do the artist thing. He's like, I want you and Medness. And at the time we had done a record. It was maybe we had started this like right before, but we did a collab, and he's like, I want you guys to do back to back. You guys are gonna headline. We're gonna promote the shit out of it. So that kind of built off of people knowing, that stuff, and so I think it's easy to kind of get lost in the back, and it's not a problem of thinking whether it was a regrettable thing. I don't think that way at all. I think it's just you have to know when to get out, and I'm a strong believer in and I don't call it ghost production at all. I it's like more of like a co-production thing, and it's always their vision and what they want and stuff like that. And
well, yeah, to me, that's kind of how I've always looked at it too, is that, if somebody has a vision for something that they want to execute, to me, it just makes sense that if they feel like they can't do it to the full extent of what they see in their head, that I don't see the problem.
Yeah, it's still a producer
for help. I mean, it's I've said this on the show before, but you even look at a guy like Kanye or any of those, any big pop production. It's 20 people in the room.
Yeah, look, there are guys who don't do or delivered finished tracks. Those are ghost produced tracks. This I would never consider ghost production. But what I tell young guys is, listen. If you can sustain yourself without having to do that, don't do it, because you start to get, you're not wasting, but you're using up creative energy for someone else's project, and then when you're going to come back to your project and maybe not be as creative, not be as motivated, you're like seeing this income. So this all got to a point for me that I was like, I don't want to do this at all anymore. Like I don't care if I have to struggle. I want to just focus 100% on myself.
Right. Because I mean, and you did work with other people in that way for a few years, right? Yeah. So you put in your time.
Yeah, and one guy that I worked with at I really learned a lot about more like underground and like kind of housey stuff, and really influenced me a lot was Sharam from Deep Dish.
Oh yeah.
And he had these records done, and it was more of like a mixing thing with him and like additional production stuff. But you really open yourself up to understanding how they think, and that's something I learned a lot from Cedric, is like the way he approaches music, the way he approaches his branding and stuff like that. So you take a lot away working with different people.
Sure. Well, and maybe one more notch in the positive column there is that that did introduce you to a lot of these guys, right? And a lot of these DJs who were doing cool stuff, and I assume relationships you can kind of build over the years. Was that around the time when you met, guys like Kaskade and all of them, or was that a little later?
So the next thing that happened was Cedric's management connected me with Don Diablo. And Don Diablo had a track that was going to come out on Axwell's label called Starlight. And they were, Don has been producer and DJ for decades, and people don't really know that,
It's crazy, man. Yeah. I've been trying to get him on this show. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So we were connected, and they were like, listen, Don has this song. It was with Alex Clare. He was signed through Sony. It's like a pop record. He wants to do like a dance version with you. You'll do it as a collab. I'm like, cool, let's do it. So me and Don, he connected us over email, and then we started Skyping, and we just hit it off, and we would just have these like epic long Skype conversations about life, about music, and it just organically, we just worked so well together. He's like, listen, and for that one, he's like, I have these stems, I have the break done, we just need to figure out a drop. And I was like, okay, cool. And then he'd go to sleep, I'd do the drop, he'd wake up, be like, this is great, change this, change that. We're like, awesome. And it was Alex Clare, Give It All, Don Diablo, and Sid, and it came out on Nicky Romero's label, Protocol.
Okay.
So me and Don were like, let's do some original shit together. And then the same thing, he'd be like, I have this break, and I'd be like, well, I have this drop. I was like, if I change it like one step up or down, like it fits perfectly.
Yeah.
And be like, sweet. And then I remember that one. He was Nicky Romero was playing main stage at Tomorrowland back to back with David Guetta, and Afrojack. And Nicky Romero's manager, this guy Sander, sent Don a video, and it's the three of them just like going fucking nuts to this track that we had just finished. And I was like, wow, this is gonna really help me. This is awesome. So we did a few more, and then, you know, going to the next step was Don was in New York, and he hadn't really broken in a big way yet.
Sure.
You know, he was already known in a lot of parts of the world, but he came to New York, and we were just talking. He's like, maybe we should start a side project, like do something way different. And we were like, just like brainstorming on ideas. He kind of wanted to go this like new, like kind of more like electro-ish vibe. And I was like, well, like, this is like a early kind of disclosure time. And I was like, well, what like, check this out. Like, you know, what if we did like something like this, but with like kind of bigger buildups and stuff. And we did this track called Got Me Thinking, which for us was like completely different. And we didn't even, I was like, where the hell are we going to put this thing out?
Right.
Like, there's nobody's doing this. Like, and Don had a relationship with Steve Angelo, and Steve Angelo had this Size X, which was like doing like kind of more housey stuff.
Sure.
And we put that out on there. And that record was like the record that right at that point where like Oliver Heldens did Gecko and
all of that was
and
just
that
blowing
stuff.
up.
So when this record came out, Steve Angelo followed me, and then Tiesto followed me, and everybody was playing that record. So that opened up the doors. And as soon as Steve Angelo followed me, the next step was like, and I was a huge, you know, kind of going back 2 years, I was like the biggest, like Axel Ingrosso, Steve Angelo, and this is pre-Swedish House Mafia.
Right.
They were coming to New York. I remember it was Steve Angelo, Ingrosso at Pasha, and it was like half full.
Yeah, people forget their careers pre-Swedish House Mafia, man.
Yeah.
They put out so much good music in that period.
Yeah. And even, you know, Axwell going to Nikki Beach, and he's playing the Inside Room to like 100 people. They put up this like this video of like, it was a recap video from that year. I think it was 2009. And I'm in the video, like right in front of right in front of Axwell, like looking. And so obviously, you know, I was a huge Steve Angelo fan, and I was like, I'm not gonna message him, but I'm gonna once I have the right record, I'm gonna send it to him. And at the time, I was, you know, in Miami a lot and working with Madness. We were like, I remember we were hanging out with these girls, and they were like, they played Renegade Master. And I was like, I mean, Menace was like, holy shit, like nobody's done this in like a long time. So we did a version, and that's what we sent to Steve. So the next kind of era for me was Steve Angelo putting this record on Size. You know, it was Sid and Madness, and that really, really helped me. And
it seemed like maybe I should say a lot of the records that people first heard of yours either, you know, had like that, either a recognizable sample or were kind of like a rework of maybe something people had forgotten about. For you, like that strikes me as a very New York thing, you know? Do you think that's just because that's kind of the way you came up, like
definitely
learning about samples? And
I think it's a combination. My middle brother David, like exposing me to all this R&B and hip hop, where like a lot of these, it's not like I have the a cappella, like I'll make like some kind of just beat driven thing, and then I start thinking of the rhythm. Like for No, it was like I was like, man, this would be sick over this. And it just kind of, I think it's just a weird combination of knowing how to sample, but then also having this like being exposed to this music. But even around that era, I was still stuck in this weird place where like I had all this success with doing this shit with Cedric, and I was like, well, I could make this stuff really, really good, so I should do that. But then like none of it connecting. And I was like, what the fuck? And around the Got Me Thinking time, people were like, you need to do like that. record.
Yeah, that's an interesting, because I think a lot of producers have this issue at some point in their career where, at least for me, it's really hard for me sometimes to tell which songs people are going to connect with of mine. Like if I try to predict, anytime I think like, oh, this is going to be the hit,
impossible.
it's never the hit.
Yeah.
And then the hit is always something that I was just like, oh, that one? Like, it's all right.
There's so many variables that go into it. You just don't know.
Yeah.
And only like in the last, 2-3 years, like I just don't care anymore about thinking about it. Like, yeah, we promote it and I'm excited about every release, but I'm never like, oh, this is the one.
Yeah, you don't tie your hopes to any particular.
And it's like, there is no real, very few artists now have like that one record. It's more like each record builds a story, and it's more about consistency now. So even if something does nothing, it's like people are still going to dig this record. I could play it in my sets. Like
yeah. And you're right, especially in the streaming era, it is just kind of about being consistent, always having something new that pops up for people's feeds. Yeah, for better, for worse.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day too, is like the streaming era, especially with Spotify, it's kind of created this almost like alternate universe. Yeah. Like when I knew I was coming to talk to you, I went on your Spotify and like brushed up on, all the music and all of that. And, you have, your Spotify numbers are healthy. It's like you do really well on Spotify. And I know, there's plenty of artists who do really well on Spotify. And I'm not saying this about you. It's like you can almost be... It's created this new world where people can have success in that world that then doesn't necessarily, like you were talking about, you never know which is going to be the hit, and you never know which is going to connect with people. And I was thinking about that, like how do you sort of marry, success from a platform and turn that into sort of real life success where people come out to the shows?
Yeah. Look,
I don't have the answer for it. I don't really know.
I think Spotify has changed a lot of things. I think these big EDM labels and artists were heavily focused on Beatport.
Yeah.
And then when Spotify came around and realized how big it was, they just everybody in the commercial side stopped caring about Beatport. I think the thing about Spotify that I have trouble with, that a lot of people have trouble with, is converting those fans into your fans.
Right.
So, you can have the most amazing Spotify formula song that has 100 million streams, but does that really make those, is that really helping you, or is it helping Spotify?
Right.
So it's, and I've had this conversation with different people, and what Spotify's been able to do is build this huge platform. They have these incredible playlists there, and they've become, tastemaker. And Austin Kramer, who supported me when he was at XM, and he was really heavily supporting me there. He's really supported me, and I see the benefit of being on these playlists and stuff, and it's about consistency and making music that's not I think, and I was lost in this a bit, when the EDM, I was trying to make records that I believed in, but kind of fit what was happening. And I think for you to really convert these fans into these listeners into your fans, you have to make music that's unique and really means something to you personally as an artist, and they will then attach, they'll be like, oh, I want to know more about this person.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think especially too in this era where, it's an open playing field, there's so many people trying to get into DJing and production and all of that. I think originality and risk taking is, obviously that's always important for making art, but I think it
now more than ever.
Yeah.
It's so easy to go to YouTube, be like, how did this person make this sound? And it's okay, now I know how to make it. I'm going to make this record that, and I talked to Don a lot about this. And he's like, I'm filtering out so much music. I'm only putting out X amount of records a year. I have, I'm picking things that that I think are moving things forward. He's like, but I'm getting like hundreds of records every week that sound like X release. And, you know, and I have guys hit me up all the time that are like, oh, like, what do you think of this? And I'm always honest. I'm like, listen, a lot of times, like, the production's great, but you need to be unique and different if you really want to stand out. Like, yeah.
Well, and, you know, on that note, we were talking about, you know, you sort of taking a step to the front and really sort of putting a stamp on what you were doing under your name.
Yeah.
And, I mean, from that point when you kind of, like you said, Steve Angelo followed you, Tiesto, all that, people started taking note. How long, I mean... You won a Grammy not that long after that, right?
That was before. That was during.
Or was that still even?
That was the Cedric time. So me and Cedric did this remix,
right,
for Lana Del Rey.
Yep.
Called "Summertime Sadness," and you know, we did it in like a day or two, and I was like, this is pretty good.
Yeah, right.
And then, you know, to Cedric's management's credit, and Cedric, you know, they really knew how to work that remix. They got Interscope to or Polydor in the UK to release that remix on Spinnin', which grew it in the clubs, and it just kind of took off. And I remember it was number one on Beatport. I'm in Miami. I'm behind Liv in like the back area, and running into like Ingrosso, and like someone introducing me, and like this guy just be like, he was nice, but I'm like, this guy has no idea who I am.
Yeah.
And doesn't care. But I'm not saying, you know, he was a really nice guy when I met him. He took the time, but I'm like, damn, like, this is crazy. So for me, it was that record and like how successful it became that like just turned me off to like not to doing stuff for other people, but at the same time motivated me to be like, if I could do this with Cedric, I can do this for myself.
Right, so that the next time that this happens, it'll be just
exactly.
you. Yeah. So that record, your name wasn't on it, but you were credited?
Yeah, I was credited.
Right, okay, that's what it was. Got it.
Yeah, so I have a Grammy.
I mean, that's amazing, man. I mean, did that... other than, you know, just the obvious awesomeness of winning a Grammy, did that change anything for you? Did you go to the Grammys?
Yeah, I went to the Grammys.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience. I was there with Cedric. It was great. I think what changed was a lot of, you know, the public didn't know at all. And he never made me sign anything saying, you know, I wasn't involved or anything or blah, blah, blah.
That's good, yeah.
And it really helped me on the industry side.
Right.
You know, labels started asking questions, oh, who are you, Sid, blah, blah. And it really put me in the door with a lot of different people. And
you eventually ended up, I'm skipping around again, but you eventually ended up signing with Big Beat, right?
Yeah, so this was again around that time, and I met Gina Tucci. This is an incredible A&R at Big Beat in Atlantic.
Yeah, I did a remix for her a long time ago. Shout out to Gina.
Yeah. And I remember meeting with her, and it was actually Matt Engelman, who is another A&R at Atlantic. He was the first person that I was introduced to there, and it was through Cedric's manager. And I had helped Sharam with a Bruno Mars remix, and so I had the acapella. This was like years ago. This was Treasure, I think. So I was like, let me just do a remix, and I'll try to get it to them. So I sent it to Luke Allen, who's Cedric's manager. I was like, listen, can you get this to them? And he's like, yeah, sure. And Matt was like, listen, Bruno's not going to take this, but I really like the remix. Let's put him on something else. So I got an official remix with Iconopop, and Matt introduced me to Atlantic. So Matt introduced me with Gina, and at first she was like, I remember like Matt was trying to get her to like take a meeting with me.
Right.
And she was like, yeah. And then a few months pass, and then she reaches out to me. She's like, listen, your name has been thrown at me from like every direction. She's like, let's meet up. So I met with her, and we met in her office one day, and then she was like, you know, we sat and talked, and then she's like, come back tomorrow, like, and we'll meet, and I want to play music, you play me music. So we did that whole thing, and she was like, basically hinting at her wanting to kind of give me a deal. And I was like, at the time I had, was doing this club stuff, and I was like, I don't not even fathom the idea of like signing with a major label, like that whole thing. Like, that's not for me right now.
Yeah.
And then Miami happened. Everybody was playing Ill Behavior. She reached out again. She's like, Carlos, I want you to come in. I want you to meet the team. I want to show you around, show you what we can do. So I went back. I met with her again, and she's like, listen. And I was like, listen, I'm doing this stuff with, Cedric and blah, blah, blah. And like, but I really want to focus on myself. And she's like, listen, we're ready to offer you a deal. Like, this will put money in your pocket. You'll be able to really focus on yourself. And that's around the same time was when Kaskade was playing the song called Got Me Thinking.
Right.
And so all of these things were kind of like happening around the same time.
Yeah. Forces aligning.
Yeah. And I met Kaskade, and he was like, at first he was like, keep sending me music. Like, I love what you're doing. And it was really my lawyer this guy Ed Shapiro, like really changed things for me. He connected me with everybody.
Oh, interesting.
He was the one who connected me with Kaskade. And Atlantic had sent me this CeeLo vocal, and this was before I even signed.
Right.
And one night I did this demo, and Ed sent it to Kaskade, and I think that was a record that Kaskade was like, whoa, like I want to really help put this kid on.
Right.
So Kaskade was like, listen, I'm not a manager. I want you to meet Stephanie at Little Empire. And I'll do everything in my power to really help you and put you on. We'll do collabs. And I was like, and Ed had been connecting me with different managers, and I never felt like this is like the golden opportunity. But
right.
When Kaskade approached me in this way, I was like, this is what you need. You need that cosign.
Yeah.
You need somebody who's going to believe in your project, somebody who's going to really push you.
He's a genuine guy too.
Yeah, 100%. So right away it was, I waited till I started working with Stephanie, and we all agreed like the Big B deal was the way to go. And right around that time was when I did know, and I had signed that to, which is a whole other story, but there's a lot, again, crazy weird things intertwined. But
but you can't just say that.
so No, I was originally going to do as a free download. And we had done artwork, and I DM'd it to Tiesto. I was like, hey man, I'm going to be putting this out. He's like, what is this? I was like, I want to sign this to my label. And I was like, dude, if you could clear this sample, it's all yours. He's like, let's do it. So we connected with his team, and it took like I remember 8 months passing.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, and at the time, his manager, it was, we had become friends and stuff too. And I remember I got a call from my manager and my day-to-day, Gabrielle, and she's like, this is after 8 months. And every month I'm like, are we there yet? Did we clear this thing? What's going on? And they're like, no. And then I got a call from Gabrielle, and she's like, listen, Carlos, like, I just got the call from Tice's management. Like, we can't get this thing cleared. So they were like, they're just going to drop it. And it was, spinning was involved too, nothing. I remember I got off the phone, and there was this guy who had helped me clear Ill Behavior. And I was like, this guy has a sample clearance company. Nobody's tried him yet.
Right. Let
me just call this guy. And I give him a call, and I'm like, listen, this is like a shot in the dark. We've been trying for months. We can't get this thing cleared. It's TLC, no scrubs. We sampled it. Tiesto wants to put it out on his label. He's like, Carlos, he's like, I used to administer Dallas Austin's catalog. He's like, I know the TLC girls. He's like, not only that, he's like, we just did a TLC original. So we have all re-sung versions of the songs. And so you won't have to clear the master side.
Wow.
And I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. So this guy made this happen. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's a wild story, man.
Yeah. So that was around the time that I signed with Kaskade and with Stephanie. And the next step for me was like, how do I go from just making music to kind of start touring?
Yeah. Was there like an overarching strategy? Did you start thinking more about like branding and presentation and that sort of thing?
That's never been my strength at all.
Yeah, mine neither.
Being with the management, that's something that they've really helped me with a lot. And I think the original strategy was Kaskade being like, let's do a collab.
Yep.
And I had this vocal called Us that, Ed, my lawyer, he was representing the writers who did Runaway for Galantis. So they wrote a vocal over something I had done. And I sent that straight to him. And he was like, I love this. Send me the parts. I'm going to finish the production and let's do it. And I was like, let's fucking do it. Awesome.
Yeah.
And that came out on his album Automatic. So when it came time, he's always been a guy that does the album thing and then does a big tour around it.
Yeah.
So when it came down for the tour, originally Stephanie was like, listen, we want to get you on these, like, the whole thing with support tours is like, it's all about the exposure.
Yep.
And she's like, listen, there's absolutely no money for these certain shows. Like, you're spending a lot on production, blah, blah, blah. Like, so we can get you on like 6 of them. And then Ryan went back to her and was like, I want him on all of them. And so it was October 2015, and that was like my first real like experience touring.
Yeah,
and
tour.
I did the entire Automatic tour. And it was like 26 shows in 1 month.
How was that experience? Was touring
Amazing.
something you enjoyed?
Yeah. It really opened my eyes to being like, probably for my health and sake, the fact that he doesn't drink or anything opened my eyes to being like, this guy's very professional about it. Like, he knows how to have fun. He like,
right.
He socializes with all the right people and knows to talk to the promoters and like does his thing in that sense. But I guess for me, it was like shock to be like, we'd leave the club at 4 a.m. and be like, all right, lobby calls in like an hour. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah. When you joked earlier that you drank a lot later in your life, it's probably,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel you, man. Like it's really good to have that example of like the top pro who like really conducts themselves that way, because, how else are you going to survive 1 hour of sleep for a month?
Yeah, so the tour was amazing. It was like a mix of these really big hard ticket shows. We did like, 8,000 in New York and like a lot on the West Coast. Chicago was like 10,000, and in those major cities, it was like that big show, and then he'd do like an after party show, and so I'd play before him at every show, and then the after party I'd play before him, and the whole tour he's like, listen, you play. I'm going to play an hour and a half, roughly, and then I'm going to bring you up, and we're going to play back to back.
That's huge.
And I was like, are you serious? Yeah, that was the whole tour, and he has such an amazing and loyal fan base that really jump-started things for me. Every city I go, they come out and they're like just such like genuinely nice people that have just been around and seen him grow for years. And
there's that trust and that relationship there. And then I'm sure anyone who he's, sort of highlighting, they're going to be way open to getting into those people. And I'm sure too, you mentioned that like winning the Grammy kind of gave you some industry notoriety. And I feel like the Kaskade tour probably did the same thing again, right?
Absolutely,
where, promoters and agents and that kind of thing probably took you more seriously after that point. And did it just kind of, from there, I mean, obviously you've been steadily releasing music. You've remixed, kind of everyone under the sun, all these huge names. Do you feel like it's kind of been a steady evolution for those last few years? Or were there any other, like, sort of pivot points or explosions in there?
I think to be honest, like, in my perspective of it, I think I went through these 2 periods where I was like, what am I really doing? And like had this like kind of epiphany of, I need to just make cool club stuff that I'm going to play. And one was like right before we did Got Me Thinking in that era. And when I did No was like, for me, it was right pre-No, I was just like in the studio, like, every day, like what am I even like doing here?
Right.
And then it kind of just clicked for me, and I was like, this is my sound. And I think there's a big divide between trying to be commercial and like release these like commercial viable streaming records, and then having like more club appeal and credibility.
Right.
So I went through that back down, and then I went through it again recently when I did these originals, like even like the CeeLo original, which is like music I really stand behind, but it's not like something I'm excited to really play in my sets,
Right.
Yeah. So,
that's another issue I think a lot of people struggle with in this day and age. I mean, you even look at like somebody like the Chainsmokers, who I love. I love those guys, and I think they're super talented. But it's there's like a disconnect, right, where they put out a lot of these poppy records, and then a lot of the times you'll go see them play, and it's these heavy like dubstep drops and all that, and to me, like I just try to put myself in the position of a fan. I feel like that would be hard to,
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly working for them, so what do I know? But
more recent time, the next thing that happened for me was kind of realizing that again. And it was after CeeLo. I'd just finished my commitment with Big Beat. And I was like, I want to go back to just, it could be a vocal, but it's got to be something that's going to like stand out in my set.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be making more club stuff. I did this bootleg of Cardi B last summer that I didn't like. I was out in Ibiza, and I'd always been kind of had a foot in that scene, and I was at Jamie Jones at DC-10, and I was like, I did a more commercial rendition of it, but for me it was like seeing this guy play that room like inspired me to go back and like make something like that. And that for me like changed the whole
like the whole paradigm kind of
the mood. Changed the whole mood of where I was and like who I wanted to be, and
sure. Like the vibe. So was the vibe at that Jamie Jones show just more of like a?
It was more. I mean, it's a different thing, but it's just like,
I mean, for people who maybe haven't been to Ibiza, like I'm trying to think of the best way to describe that kind of vibe. Because I mean, it's still house music, but it's. It's more underground, and it's more. I think it's just more about the vibe. It's less about the.
One standout record that like everyone's gonna go crazy.
Right.
It's like him and Martinez brothers and those guys. They're like, for me, it's like they kind of create these peaks and valleys, and it might not be something that like you've completely noticed, but when they kind of can play the right records and then kind of create this tension that just like people go crazy,
right?
And
it's less about the tension and release in a single song, and more about doing that over 20 songs. Yeah.
And it's this guy never plays the same set twice. Like, and some shows you can go to, he'll be slightly more commercial. Some he'll be like more minimal and techie, and but it's all kind of beat driven, and a lot of it is like feels a lot like almost like sample like hip hop drums and stuff in the patterns and stuff. So I don't know, but that kind of was like I want to be making more club shit, and that kind of for me it reset me. Like I did this bootleg a lot of people were playing it, and then I was just like I gotta just kind of go back to making records that I think are cool, that like I'm gonna play, that other DJs are gonna play.
Did you get any pressure from the label or the management or whatever to keep making hits? What I mean?
And even when I was with Big Beat, they never were like, they saw the project as like a grower, like kind of thing. They never pressured me, but being in that system, it's like you can have a big club record and then they'll really get behind it. But I was like, man, I'm in this system. Like I see what they're doing with Galantis, and I felt like I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, where I was like trying to like compromise, like
right.
And then once I was finished with that deal, my Stephanie, and she's always been like, she's never really swayed me in one direction or another. She's like, she always has pushed the club route though, like for sure. She built Kaskade from doing like the smallest rooms to what he.
Well, and that's a good manager,
And I'll have moments where I'll be like, Steph, like, what are we doing? Like, And she's like, Carlos, like, look back, like, look where you were 4 months ago, 5 months ago. And I'm like, I'll take a deep breath and I'll be like, oh shit, you're right, fine. And it's like, you know, going back to some guys who have a lot of success on a pop level, like those kind of artists are very few in between. You really, it's a grind, you know, you want to build every show. I feel like I play, you know, you get new fans. And for me, it was like going back to that mentality of it. Like I need to grow that side of it. And
yeah. Is that where your head's at right now?
Yeah.
You know, very club focused.
Definitely. And, you know, I did, around the time I was talking to Don, who I still remained like, you know, really close friends with. Along the way, we did a couple other collabs and stuff. And, and I helped launch Hexagon we did a remix of Make Me Feel Better. And that like really did really well. And
his label.
Yeah. And he's just has built this label to, you know, an incredible place. And he's like, I was like, Don, let's do a record for your label. Like, I want to do one. And he's like, well, why don't we do an EP? He's like, I'll really push it. Like, I want to help you. I'll get behind it. And I was like, okay. So like, we were like Skyping. I played him a few things. He's like, that's crazy. So finish that. And at the time, he had already been playing this club record that I did called Work. He's like, so let's do this one called I Miss You, which when I played it for him was like, I already had like the vocoder and like the just like pluck melody after. And he's like, finish that right away. And so, you know, this last year has really, really, really helped me grow. First we did I Miss You as a single in January, and then we did the EP around, I think, February or March.
Yeah.
Trying to be consistent with originals, with remixes. You know, I'll still kind of go a little on the more commercial side on some of these remixes.
Sure. Which makes sense. You can kind of flex those muscles in that arena, you know.
Yeah.
You know, moving forward, what should people be looking out for? Like, what in 3 months, 12 months, what are you working on?
So I've been, the last year, I kind of been, you know, kind of building this idea of launching my own label. And it really being my own kind of brand of club records.
Yeah.
You know, I think I have developed like a certain club sound. And so I've been really, I think, about 4 records into the label already, but nothing is signed. I'm looking to partner with somebody on the label side that can promote it on like a, you know, on a bigger label and distribute it to making sure it gets the ears on it that it needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a bunch of new music.
That's great, man. I mean, that's sort of another full circle moment. If you know, you start this label, that you can then provide this platform that was provided to you from people you worked with in the past.
Yeah,
I love seeing that, man. I like it when artists, you know, will sort of contribute to the community a little bit, you know, because I think that's, especially in this, you know, we were talking about how do people make themselves known, how do you get your name out there. I think you really need support from the artist community now more than ever.
Definitely, yeah.
Last question. We always end asking kind of just a simple question, very random. You don't have to think about it super hard. Just a memory, first thing that pops into your head of just a moment when music really deeply affected you. And that it's meant to be broad, and it's kind of just like the first thing that pops into your mind. It could be something you heard on the radio, something you saw in a club.
I think I was like 5 years old, and I remember it was like we were watching this live broadcast, and it was some. This is like my earliest memory of music, and I was obsessed when I was little with La Bamba.
Oh yeah,
and my parents let me stay up, and I've like for some reason I remember this, like they were like, my parents let me stay up to watch this. It's like way past my bedtime, and just like going, I don't know, that's like for me is the earliest memory of music.
Yeah,
it's a pretty random one.
No, that's great though. I love that, man. That's those early memories are the ones that stick with you, right?
I guess another one in like, you know, my career of music would definitely be Miami Music Week, and I had sent Steve Angelo this record, Ill Behavior, and you know, he's done this to me a few times where all he says is like, he'll respond back and just say, I like it. Or I love it. And I'd be like, what does that mean, Steve? Right. And he had done this decade party in Wynwood. And I remember being there, and all of a sudden like he played Ill Behavior, and I was like, oh shit, okay, this is sick.
Yeah.
So that was a big moment for me. That whole, yeah.
Yeah, the first time kind of seeing someone you look up to playing the song at the right moment in the right place. Yeah, those are, I have a few of those too, man. Those are beautiful moments.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, this has been great. I appreciate you having me over.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's it.
Awesome.
I'll talk to you next time, my friend.
All right, thank you.
All right, peace. All right, that's the show. Shout out to Sid. I'm still thinking about that ramen we grabbed after the interview. Just a great time, man. Fun day. Make sure to check out sidmusic.com for all of his new tunes, his tour dates. You can also follow me. willyjoy.com is where you can go to get all my music, dates, old podcast episodes, anything you want. You can also email me, backtobackpod@gmail.com is the address, or at WillyJoy or at backtobackpod for all social media needs. All right, guys and gals, that's it for this week. Another episode in the can. In the next couple weeks, we have some true legends coming on the show. Stay tuned for that. Stay locked. I hope everybody out there has a great weekend, great rest of your week. Go out, do something fun, hug somebody you love, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.